Welcome back, my friends, to AA Recovery Interviews. I'm your host, Howard L., and I'm an alcoholic. Sober since January 1st, 1988, one day at a time. I'm grateful you joined us. AA Recovery Interviews is the podcast where Alcoholics Anonymous members from around the world share their extraordinary stories of experience, strength, and hope. There are more than 160 interviews in this podcast series, all of which you can enjoy on aarecoveryinterviews.com and on all podcast apps. As the frontman for a British band that was among the vanguard of punk rock in the late 1970s, my guest, David P., rode the new wave of that musical genre as both writer and performer. Like many rock musicians, his alcohol and drug use preceded and then accompanied his career. Both in good times and bad, David's life was soaked with booze and cocaine that went with him when he moved to L.A. Failed relationships, both personal and professional, became consequential for David as he struggled to maintain functionality in his life. But like many, being a functional alcoholic still meant living as an alcoholic. As the disease stripped away every meaningful aspect of his life, David's inevitable bottom rapidly approached. By the time he got sober 37 years ago, AA became David's sole refuge and the solid ground he so desperately needed to rebuild his life. In the process of stacking his sober years, David's involvement in AA has remained both dedicated and continuous, especially in the 3 decades he spent in service to the Hospitals and Institutions Committee. With every visit to a prison or hospital, David continued to build the vast amount of spiritual capital he would need in his battles with lung cancer and other gravely serious medical conditions. In demonstrating the nature and value of service work to his fellow AA members, he has been enfolded into their love and support. David's courage and optimism are proof positive that AA really can help us through even the toughest of times. I think you will find the next hour of AA Recovery Interviews to be both captivating and inspirational. So please enjoy the next 60 minutes with my friend and AA brother, David P.
I'm David, and I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, David.
We
That's
went
the
round that one
answer.
the long way, didn't we?
I think we both qualify as alcoholics. We've probably been to thousands and thousands of meetings where we've said our name, and AA is always very friendly in that we say hi to people. I want to thank you so much for agreeing to let me interview you on such short notice for the AA Recovery Interviews podcast. This show has been very helpful to people all over the world who need a chance to hear people's story and see how they stay sober. And what's a little different about my show is I like to spend more time talking about the solution than the problem, because everybody can identify with the what it was like part of the story and what happened part. Those are juicy most of the days, but it's how do you stay sober through thick and thin, troubles and triumphs, etc. I wanted to ask you, as we get started, David, how are you feeling today?
You know, I'm doing okay. This is a week that I don't have any chemo, so I don't have to contend with that. And a lot of last week was kind of tough. But the last few days have been great. And, you know, I just have to remember that I really don't have a lot to moan about.
Especially when there's so many people out there wondering if I got sick with an illness, either terminal or debilitating, would I be able to stay sober? And I'll admit I wondered the same thing myself when I was new in AA. And you mentioned you've got cancer. What kind of cancer do you have?
I've got lung cancer. And now I've got lung cancer in the brain. It metastasized to the brain, and then leptomeningeal disease. It's in the brain fluid now, which is problematic. But you know, I've got great doctors. I'm in the best place in the world.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got to choose a career in cancer, this is the place to be.
Los Angeles, that's where you're at?
Yes.
So how long ago did you get diagnosed with the lung cancer, and how healthy were you before then?
Well, that would have been, the first surgery was 2008. I've been 6 in all. But we're battling on. We're pretty much on the last line of defense, but, you know, we're doing okay.
What were your feelings when you first found out about the cancer?
Well, I had a long history with my higher power.
Mm-hmm.
And sure, I was frightened and discombobulated by the whole cancer thing, but I didn't feel like I'd been abandoned or singled out, or, there were plenty of other people going through difficult times with different things. I always believed that, I'd beat it, I suppose, although the likelihood is at this point that I won't. But, I'm okay with that too. Bill asks us, do you have a program that works in rough going? And, over the time that I've been sober in Alcoholics Anonymous, I've got a program that works in rough going. Yes, we've been through some stuff, some of my own stupidity.
When you brought the news back to your group, back to the fellowship that supports you,
Yeah,
what was the overall response?
they just closed around me. AA is a beautiful, beautiful thing. And they save the best for when you need it. They brought meetings to me, came to see me in the hospital. Recently, when I've been doing the radiation thing, people just turned up in the morning, drove me to the meeting, sat outside, read a magazine. We got in the car, we maybe stopped off and had some lunch and went home.
That's beautiful.
I don't know of any other organization in the world where, all that is quite so automatic.
Thinking back early on, let's say even before the diagnosis and so forth, did you ever wonder whether the program would be there for you in a terrible, tragic time in your life?
Well, I had seen it happen. I've been involved in hospitals and institutions, and I saw the way that, people. There was one director who was director about 4 or 5 times before I was, and he got cancer and shuffled off the mortal coil. But everybody was really there for him, and everyone updated it, and it just is. Alcoholics Anonymous is the magic kingdom. I wasn't prepared for the level of it. I knew that it existed, but I don't think until I experienced it myself that I realized, what a wonderful program and mechanism Alcoholics Anonymous is.
We get to have compassion and support for other people in the midst of their diseases because we're in a program that deals with one of the most deadly, if not the most deadly disease out there.
Yeah. I think, when you see people transformed, they come in and they're transformed in a relatively short period of time. We finally get it. I always thought that the answer to living is to shove as many shiny, wonderful, expensive items into my part of the board as I could possibly lay my hands on.
Mm-hmm.
But counterintuitively, and there's a lot of counterintuition in the program, the answer is to lose interest in yourself and gain interest in your fellows. And when you do that, you will be happier. And we come in, we're faced with a number of counterintuitive propositions. Surrender to win.
Let go, hang on.
Yeah, it's all counterintuitive. Once we embrace the counterintuitive nature of the program, we're kind of halfway there.
It takes a while for us to get to the point where we understand the counterintuition. When people are doing really well, I'll say to them, you need to go to more meetings. Your life is going great. You've got a great wife, big house, great job, lots of money, everything else. You need a meeting. It just doesn't sound right, because it's easy to tell somebody whose ass is falling off, get your ass into a meeting here. But when everything is going right, why would a guy need AA if everything?
Why would I need? Yes, I know it's absurd, but we don't see it in real time. We don't see ourselves. We don't see the disease. We don't see the program working in the mysterious ways that it does around us and about us and in us.
Yeah, and you've been working with it the last 37 years. What were the circumstances under which you got into AA? Was it something that you aspired to from the time you were a child?
No, there was nothing like that. I mean, it was just I'd painted myself into a corner again because the power to change doesn't come from standing up in a pulpit and announcing your own righteousness. I'm
Right.
not going to drink. There's no power for change. The power for change comes from watching yourself do it one more time, thinking, this is really going to hurt.
Hmm.
And doing it anyway, because that's the way we are.
What was your exposure to alcoholism or alcohol abuse in your family of origin?
Well, my father was a drinker, but I don't think he was an alcoholic. He never had mood
Mm.
changes. Uh, he
Hmm.
was a good drunk. My mother didn't really drink enough to be an alcoholic, but there was a clue for me. Nobody ever spoke about my maternal grandfather. And so I started digging in the later days of my mother's life. And she said, well, he came back from work as usual about 9 o'clock.
Hmm.
9 o'clock? People don't come home from work for it. He went to the pub. Every night he went to the pub. And he came home and he was poorly. They're all from up
Hmm.
north on my mother's side. They were potter and southern in my father's side. Um, so he called the doctor. So they sent the eldest daughter out with a coin down to the end of Stockton to call the doctor and ask him to come. The doctor said, just tell him to go to bed and I'll come round in the morning. What kind of doctor does that? A doctor who knows he's dealing with a drunk. Anyway, she went home and things got worse. So
Hmm.
they sent Auntie Olive out again with another threepence or something to say, you're going to have to come. He's really turned bad. So the guy turns up and he gives him a sedative
Hmm.
and it kills him because, there's no knowing how much he'd already had. So, and nobody ever speaks like about him in the family.
You had to find this out for yourself years and years later.
Yeah, I had to work it out because it is perplexing. But I grew up my dad was in the army, so we grew up in the colonies, and the British at the time were ruling the world. This is back in the 50s and early 60s, and it was how you got to the colonies was if you became an embarrassment to the regiment, they just pushing you into more and more remote places where you could do less and less damage.
So you were causing a lot of damage, I take it.
Well, I wasn't. I mean, I was just a kid. So you turn 8 and they send you off to boarding school, with a little tag on your lapel saying, please feed this bear or whatever.
I've interviewed a lot of people who've gone to boarding school, and it's about evenly split between the kids who felt it was a great experience and kids who felt pretty bad along the way because they were being deserted by their parents. What were your feelings at the time when you were going to boarding school?
Oh, it was awful. It was like being dropped off at the convent. But it's not why I'm an alcoholic.
Hmm.
I blamed boarding school for a lot of my isolationist and self-destructive nature,
Mm-hmm.
but it actually was alcohol. It was a horrible, horrible place with horrible, horrible people who did horrible, horrible things. Like I said, it felt like getting dropped off at the orphanage, but that's not why I'm an alcoholic.
Yeah, I get that. You were there from 8 till what age?
Till I got tossed out at about 14, 15. So about 7 years.
So when did you first find alcohol? Did you find it in that environment?
Um, no, it was very much involved in, as I said, in the colonies. It was what you did to have a good time. You drank on the beach, you had drinks parties, and so I tried alcohol, but I didn't really like it. It was only later I embraced pills and hashish because they weren't the drug of my parents. Eventually, the equation was it just became easier and easier to get the booze.
You mentioned getting tossed out of school at 14. Was that as a result of drinking?
No, it was just because I was bloody minded and I wanted to get thrown out. Also, I was fighting some injustices that were worth fighting for, but that was an excuse.
Yeah. When did you first drink on your own volition?
Well, at holidays, we'd get farmed out to all these parents who didn't want us, relatives that didn't want us.
Uh-huh.
One Christmas, I got farmed out to my uncle Bill, who was a character. He played rugby for Durham, and
Hmm.
he was a tough guy. He said, "Okay, now it's time." I'm not going to do the accent, but it's thick. He says, "Okay, it's time you learn how to drink." So it was New Year's Eve, and he said, "Try some of this. It's sherry."
Mm-hmm.
By the time we got to creme de menthe frappe, we'd been through the entire bar, and I was completely plastered. And then because it was New Year's Eve, we got in the car, and I was about 10 or something, and I was making out with my aunt's girlfriend.
Oh, no.
I was like 10. But always with the desire to disappear with alcohol. There's also, in my case, and I think in a lot of other people's cases, the desire to compensate for the lack of love, for the love that you felt deprived of in your childhood.
Yeah.
And for me, the two things went hand in hand.
Yeah. I felt the same way. But the minute I was able to change those feelings with alcohol and drugs,
Yeah.
I had the magic answer. Did they provide for you a relief at the time? And were you seeking that relief each time you drank or used drugs?
Um, yes, I mean, drink tended to be more of a pathway drug for the drugs. I mean, I remember in the last part of my being in London, I'd have some bad experience drinking. I'd say, okay, I'm not going to drink anymore. That's it. I'm just going to smoke pot. And then a few nights later, I'll be passing the pub, and I think, well, I should go in and say hi to Barry. It'd be rude not to. I mean, and so I go in, and well, if I'm going to, say hi to Barry, I've got to drink something. So I'll just drink half a pint. And then going in there with the best of intentions, and 4 o'clock in the morning, down at the dealers, drinking and taking coke, and thinking, what the hell happened? And the strength of my will in so many other areas was high functioning.
I've got so many friends who their recovery was delayed significantly because of that functional part of their nature. They were able to function in their jobs or function in their marriages
Yeah.
and function in school, and so everything got delayed until they could no longer function. So you were functioning okay.
I would have been functioning a whole lot better if I hadn't been getting loaded all the time.
But then you have to ask yourself, how would you have dealt with the way that you were feeling had you not had the drugs and alcohol?
Yeah, I think I would have had to have dealt with the emotional fallout from, you know, my family, and I just couldn't see it. I couldn't see it. I always thought I'm the bad person. Uh, I never understood until quite late in life that the problem in the family was my mother
Mm-hmm.
and her manipulation and her periodic alcoholism. Because of course her father was the guy we were just talking.
Did that provide much relief once you got to that understanding about your mother?
Well, it takes you so long, it took me so long to see things as they actually were. It took a long time of being sober in the program, a long time of writing inventories, listening to other people,
Mm-hmm.
because that's kind of what happens. We listen to other people who have similar things, and we and we identify with that.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, we start thinking, well, gee, if I identify with that, maybe there's some element of that in my life too. And then you start, turning over different rocks.
And it's amazing what you find under those rocks, isn't it?
Yeah, I had no idea what I was in for when I came into the program.
How old were you when you came in?
34.
So, from the time that you first started until age 34,
Hmm.
you've had the life of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I don't know, maybe in that order or not.
Mhm.
I'm always curious whenever I speak with people who are in the performing arts of any kind about their experience when it came to the people they were around and whether those people helped or hurt them. What was your experience through the years that you were performing?
Well, there were enablers around. There are more and more enablers around you. If you become more successful. Frankly, I didn't need them. I was doing a perfectly dreadful job on my own.
Uh-huh.
But I think also because for me, I was the writer. It was a creative outlet, writing around the borders of the issues. And it took me a long time to break into the center. You start off and maybe you write a couple of songs and you get lucky,
Yeah.
but then you learn a little bit, and a little bit is dangerous,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
because then you've got to start the full education.
Yeah.
That takes time.
Probably does. And, there are those who seem to be able to get to some of that sooner than later, but it seems like the introspection and the self-awareness and self-knowledge usually doesn't show up on the early end of their careers. What was your experience?
If at all. I mean, there are plenty of people who get by without writing, "Bend Over Baby" 100 times, or whatever your preoccupation may be. The perennial preoccupations of the songwriter are, you know, love and dancing and motor cars and all that kind of stuff. And if you're actually going to write about the internal experience, you have to have experienced it.
Were you, when you were writing, were the drugs and or alcohol aiding that process?
Yeah, well, I thought that I would stumble on the perfect medicine, the perfect, a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and out would come
Hmm.
a hit song. But it just wasn't like that. And when I first got sober in the program, I did some writing, but not much. And I look back on it now, and actually, that writing was, I'm recording some of them now. That writing was actually pretty good. Yeah, it was introspective, but it worked. But then I felt like I really need to get
Hmm.
my life in order. So then I really settled down to do, you know, the program and the steps. And I didn't come back to, writing and playing again till about 2000, when I went off and did a tour in Japan, which reminded me of what fun it all could be.
Yeah, I'll bet. And in sobriety, too.
Yeah, yeah, I was having a good time in sobriety. I mean, I was young. I was married to Hunter at this point. We had a lot of other friends who were, we hung out with, and lots of all that. It was fun. It's fun being, a sober, in the sober world.
When you were still using, though, before you hit age 34 and came into AA, while you were writing and performing, and did you hit a significant bottom? What was your experience with that?
Well, I'd come to America with a girl who was basically a groupie,
Mm-hmm.
whose father had just started a bunch of Silicon Valley companies, and all of a sudden the whole family was rolling in it. And, it was stretch limos and champagne and all that kind of stuff until it wasn't. And as we started out on my second divorce, I had to face a bunch of things. One was that, in all that 4 years we'd been married, I'd neglected to lay my hands on any of that lovely money.
Oh, no.
I was now broken in a corner, and I was going out to all these gigs in Northern California and see all these bands who, had been supporting me, filling out stadiums, and it was painful, but it was I nothing is wasted in God's economy, Bill said.
Yeah, that's right.
In God's economy, these lessons in humility, though
Yeah.
often painful, bear a weight in spiritual gold.
How aware were the people around you of what was going on with you and your drug use or drinking or both?
I was with the heiress, and we had, lots and lots of friends, and until she started divorcing me, and all the friends
They all moved away.
somewhere else. And I hung around up in Northern California for a while, and then I rented a U-Haul and carried what was left of my life down to Los Angeles, where I knew nobody,
Hmm.
and I kind of built it up from there. I think the people who wrote checks in the industry, because there's lots of people who do stuff in the industry, but the ones who actually write the checks are few and far between. And I think that they knew that I'd lost money a couple of times, and nobody was really lining up to do it again. And I think also that I didn't have a consistent narrative as to what had actually happened in my life. I was actually in a good place. I mean, that was pretty much it. If I had have had the wherewithal then, but I just kind of withdrew from the situation, which was what I did a lot. A big part of my illness is about disappearing. It's about not showing up.
And AA is a show up place, isn't it?
Yeah, you got to get up and show up.
We'll be right back. My friends, if you're enjoying AA recovery interviews, I invite you to check out my latest audiobook, Alcoholics Anonymous, the story of how more than 100 men have recovered from alcoholism. This is the word-for-word, cover-to-cover reading of the first edition of the Big Book, published in 1939. It's a relaxing yet meaningful and engaging way to listen to the Big Book anytime, any place. Have a free listen at Audible, iTunes, or Amazon. While you're there, search for my other audiobook, Lost Stories of the Big Book, 30 original stories from the first and or second editions missing from the third and fourth editions of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's an engaging audiobook that brings these stories to life for AA members who've never seen them. These timeless testimonials were originally cut to make room for newer stories in the third and fourth editions. But their vitally important messages of hope are as meaningful today as they were when they were first published. Many listeners will hear these stories for the very first time. It's also available from Amazon as a Kindle book or in paperback if you'd like to read along. You're going to love it. And we're back. So you were disappearing. Was this the people you were closest to you were disappearing from, or this was people in your work? Who were you getting away from?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, career-wise, what I should have done is get out of California and go back to London, where at least I could work. But, in those days, it was a different world too, because it's not like it is today. I can sit down here with my computer and make a record. Before, you needed the beatification of some fat cat with the corner office to be able to record.
David, what were your final days like before you got into AA?
There were two bottoms, really. One was right after the band quit, because all the other guys went on to much more successful bands. But I was a writer, I was a singer, I was screwed. And, I'd drink on my own and tell myself I was writing.
Mm-hmm.
But there again, I was rescued from that by the heiress, and off we went to the parties, starting over again. And then when she'd had enough and started divorce proceedings, all of a sudden I was back in that same corner.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I got sober. And there's a strange story about how it works because people ask me, well, what's your higher power like? And I think my higher power is the god of statistical likelihood.
That's great. The statistical likelihood.
It, it goes something like this. The night before I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I just heard from a friend of ours that one of the guys who'd been my best pal in London had died of a drug overdose. He'd come out of a rehab and said, "I love this program stuff. It's great. I'm going to do it. I'm so going to get sober. But before I do, I need to say goodbye to my lover." He took heroin one last time, and it killed him. And that scared me because I realized that I may well be headed in very much the same direction. And, that night I had a dream that, I was Joe at the point at which his spirit left the body. It rose up like, to the ceiling. And looking down, I could see, the squalor of the apartment, Joe's rotting teeth, and just the sadness of it all, and it went through me like 1,000 volts. Normally, if you wake up from a bad dream, you're sitting up in bed sweating. I was out of bed, I was standing to attention, and I was a block of ice. And that didn't leave me. And the next day, I had the insane idea to go to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And that night I went into the Campbell Community Centre, room 47. I figured, well, they got to have gullible young women in Alcoholics Anonymous. So the last few times I've really, it's really gone pancake shaped. I'd always been saved by, a woman.
The woman who was your wife for the 4 years before she divorced you, was she cleaning up your messes and enabling you along the way, do you think?
Well, she was making plenty of messes of her own, but basically, yes. She died of an overdose a couple of years ago. So I'm there. I'm chatting to some girls after the meeting, and this is looking quite likely, but I'd made the the strategic error of announcing myself as a newcomer. And this guy came over and he would not. I was trying to dump that son of a bitch, and there was no way he was going anywhere. And he screwed it up with the girls. And so he said, well, let's go to the Coco's in Campbell. So off we went, and I told him the story that I just told you. And he said, I knew Joe. And I said, well, Jonathan, I don't think you did, because, Joe was only in America for 7 days. I was with him every one of those days. And I can't imagine that there's anyone on the entire American continent, north or south, that knew Joe. He said, well, Joe was dating this girl called Janita. All of a sudden, he had my attention because actually I'd been dating Janita when I went off with the arrest. And Joe was always honing in on him. So, but I didn't know that. But he knew more about it than I did. And her father was a lawyer. Yeah, I can remember that. They had a place in Gloucester Road, and he'd worked as an apprentice for her father. And he tells me this story about, Joe ripping him off on a coke deal and turning around and laughing in his face. And I knew that I'd been to the only person on the entire American continent to Joe to tell that story. And as I began to calculate what those odds might be, I had this sense of well-being, of, finally being at peace. Yeah. It was a warm feeling. And I've not taken a drug or a drink since then.
So God put somebody in your life after that moment of clarity, that block of ice that you had become, where you knew you needed some help, and you went into AA, and your higher power, God, put this man in front of you who, of all the 8 billion people in the world, knew your situation and knew you and knew her and knew your friend Joe. That's just absolutely astonishing.
And for once in my life, I could understand the astonishing nature of. I thought I
Yeah.
knew everything. I thought I knew how, and the religious people were all, you know, con men and clowns. And all of a sudden, there was a little gap in that defense, a little bit of maybe I don't know everything, and from there it goes to, okay, if you don't know everything, why don't you get out of the prediction game, get out of the ideas game, and watch the actual evidence, which is what is asked of us in AA, and it's a subtle slay of hand from Bill Wilson, who wrote the big book. Because, in step 12, he said, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. Okay, well, if it's a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, well, the first 3 steps are the acceptance steps. This sucks. Something seems to be working for those weasels in AA. And maybe if I do what they do, it'll work for me too. You're in.
You're in.
The next 6 steps are the work steps designed to uncover, discover, and discard, the reasons why you do what you do in the way that you do it.
Mm-hmm.
And the last 3 are the maintenance steps. But if it's you don't get the spiritual awakening till the end of the work steps, say step 9, which would make sense because that's where the promises come, then it does rather beg the question: what are we doing at step 3 when we make make our lives over to the care of a loving God? Well, I think what Bill is actually saying is this: we don't give a fat rat's ass what you believe. We don't even give a fat rat's ass if you believe. But if you want what we have, you'll do
Right.
what we do. And what we do is we get on the spiritual path and we start looking for the good in people, looking for the beauty in the world, instead of the ugliness and the betrayal that so captivates the alcoholic psyche.
And the on-ramp into the program is about as steep or level as the people coming in will have it be. This sounds like this was all happening within a relatively short period of time for you. How long did it take you to get a sponsor and start working the steps?
Oh, I was pretty desperate. I dived straight into it. Did I know very much about what I was doing? No. When I did my 4 step, did I have any idea of any of these undercurrents that we talked about with my mother and so on? No, I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
But, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's about the willingness to do it, willingness to stand in the mirror, take your clothes off, and look at yourself. And it's also to surrender to the idea that you don't know everything. There's an implied contract in step 3. God, I offer myself to thee, to build with me and do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. So remove the bondage of self so that I can help other people. There's a revolution in alcoholic thinking.
And of course, you can't help anybody until you've helped yourself through the help of other people. I think it takes some people longer than others. It took me well over a year to even start doing the steps because I thought the day I walked into AA, I read the steps on the wall, I read the traditions and promises, and I said, okay, I got it, now what? And it wasn't until I started working with a sponsor and started to get really serious about the program. At what point during your early years, David, did you feel like you were in the middle of the program, or did you feel that way from the very start?
No, I think I really felt in the middle of the program when I started in H&I. Hospitals and institutions work. H&I bolts you to the floorboards of the program, and it's a beautiful thing. If it's good to give your higher power an excuse to keep you hanging around,
Hmm.
and I like being useful, and I like, I don't know. Well, one guy I got sober, but for 30 years I did H&I. I didn't strike anybody sober. Except at the end, some kid came up to me, and I sponsor him now, but he said, I heard you speak in Clare, and that was it for me. So we bring meetings and literature to people who can't otherwise get out to the regular meetings.
Now, have you been doing that the whole time you've been sober? Are you still involved in that?
Yeah, I got involved. I think I had slightly less than 90 days. And some guy said, "Come along and speak on my panel." So I went along and spoke on his panel at Juvenile Hall because I was about the youngest damn alcoholic they had up there. And and then they called up and said, "Hey, he left town, but he said you were taking over."
Oh, no.
And so began 30 years.
30 years. That's amazing. Yeah, I know people who are involved with the hospitals and the institutions, and several of my good friends are involved with the prison system and taking meetings into those facilities. You didn't go through any kind of treatment center. You came straight into AA like I did.
Yeah, yeah. That's not to say I didn't know very much because the heiress, wife number two, periodically did, a spin dry. She'd go to this rehab, stay sober for, a couple of weeks, barely do the full 30 days, and come out and start drinking again, pretty much, except one time. One time she stayed sober for like 4 months or something. It was, man, I couldn't wait for that bitch to get drinking again.
And this is while you were sober. Did you ask her to come to meetings with you? Did you try and get her involved in the program?
Well, on the family side, yes. So at one point, one of the counselors said to me, "How much do you drink?" I said, "Well, I maybe a six-pack a night, and and some pot."
Mm-hmm.
"How much pot do you smoke?" I said, "Well, 10, 20 a day, same as normal people." And they all laughed. I didn't get it
Oh, no.
until I went away and I thought about it, and I was, faintly insulted.
Yeah. And that service work that you're talking about is so important, especially when there is AA on the end of it. I think if there's ever a weak link between commercial recovery centers and spin dries and sober living arrangements, if there's one weak link, it's the link between the end of those programs and the beginning of the AA program. The handoff has to be pretty clean and pretty quick. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that it gives you a great sense of gratitude when I come out of those meetings, step through that door, leaving the smell of bleach and desperation, and walk out into the cool air of the evening and freedom. It was a terrific sense of gratitude.
Yeah, it is.
Gratitude is such a key component for an alcoholic who wants to put some time together and make a life. You have to practice gratitude, and H&I really, really helped me with that.
That's wonderful that you're so involved. Can you think of some times during the 37 years that you've been sober where your sobriety or your commitment to staying sober was stretched thin, where you might have given some thought to not staying in AA?
Well, there were periods when my wife relapsed, and that was hard on a number of different levels, including, my own stupidity. But I've never ever felt it's a bad idea to be in AA, because I was bolted to the floorboards by H&I. I was involved in sponsoring people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of the reason I worked in H&I was that I probably wasn't very good at sponsoring other people. I don't think I was. I think I was still too self-involved, and also my first sponsor had a fairly rudimentary grasp of AA. I think I do a better job now because I can't do H&I because of a lot of the health things.
Mm-hmm.
So it's forced me to be a better sponsor.
To me, that's one of the best ways to do service. And if your life changes and circumstances change, your service can change as well. When you were doing the H&I, were you asked by people inside to get together with you once they were out?
Yeah, absolutely. I never saw any of those sons of bitches on the other side of it. You know, it's like sometimes you go downtown and it's foul traffic. You turn up and the guard the guard for the night has got a bad attitude and tells you they're on lockdown. You get back in the car, you drive all the way back through downtown,
Mm-hmm.
and nothing has changed. You've still got as many spiritual brownie points as you had as if you'd stood up there to 600 people and sang Johnny Cash songs. So it's part of leaving the results to our higher power. My job was to show up and speak my truth and try and shut my ego up and practice compassion.
It's like spiritual accountability, isn't it?
Yeah, and also practice gratitude and humility. That could very easily be me on the other side of that table.
How difficult is it for you to get others to come into the facilities with you?
Not hard at all, particularly the more fierce meetings are, like, oh God, we got to go drive for 2 hours up to Magic Mountain and go to the prison there, which is a maximum security thing. And you go with a bunch of guys, you'd have dinner on the way, and next time you saw them at a meeting, there was a spackling of people that you'd spent time with, hours of dinner talking about it, and everybody had stories. I remember we were at that place up by Magic Mountain, Security Max. There was only one guy who signed up for AA that night.
Mm-hmm.
Three of us. They brought him in, and he was in leg irons and handcuffs, and they unlocked his leg irons, and he looked up, and it was the guy from my men's meeting.
Oh my God.
He was a third striker. you know. He'd relapsed and nicked somebody's handbag or something, and she'd protested. I mean, I'm just what he told me, and he hit her, and he was out of the game.
Mm.
Wow. Well, and some of them are funny. Like you go to there's a kind of like a drag queen ward there, which is probably something else entirely now.
Some of the guys I know who could take the meetings behind the walls say that sometimes the only thing that gets men to come to the meeting is the air conditioning in the room that the meeting is held in. But if they'll do that long enough and open up their minds just a little bit, there's usually one or two guys who they'll see the sparkle in the eye. And
Yeah.
I have a friend, in fact, he was one of the interviews I did a couple of years ago. He's back inside. And he does extraordinary work out in the community with the homeless and the hungry and that sort of thing. But he was on parole, and something happened that he violated his parole.
Yeah.
So he was locked back up.
Yeah.
He's back in prison. And all the good work he was doing out on the streets of Houston kind of went by the wayside.
Yeah. I mean, justice and justice do not necessarily go hand in hand. I remember one guy, it was his third DUI, and he'd run a quite successful small record label. He had this singer with him. They'd been out at a gig or something, and they were driving home. He had had a bit too much. I'd read about it in the newspapers, and he said, she looked at me, and she said, "You know, I'm so grateful to have had you in my life," he said, "and then we hit this truck." And she was instantly killed. You realize that, you know, we're lucky. And there are plenty of people who aren't that lucky. Remember another guy, he'd been with a well-known group. He didn't remember why he was there. He just remembered that he'd picked up a drink and started drinking. He didn't know what he was in jail for. Didn't know whether it was murder or whether it was double parking. You know, and he asked me to let Clancy know he was there. So the alcoholic wanders around town, looking at people going by in Bentleys and saying, "Why not me?" And it's not so often that we sit around watching somebody push a trolley, say, "Why not me?"
Mm-hmm.
There's absolutely no reason for either. It's all in the lap of the gods, which is what makes acceptance so important to us.
It's important for people to see other people being accepting, I think. You know, that we teach each other.
Yeah.
And I think at sometimes we're more teachable, sometimes we're more preachable. But in my experience, as long as I stay close to the program and the men and women in the program, specifically the men, that I'm able to be of maximum service. And it sounds like the work that you're doing and have done with H&I is extraordinary. I want to really, from my own perspective, thank you for that kind of service, because it's not the kind of service everybody wants to do. So
I'm grateful I got to do it. It was a wonderful part of my recovery, and it gave me a great sense of being connected to, you know, this spiritual equation. You know, I don't believe in some old guy up on the clouds, you know, but I do believe in the spiritual equation, and that when I ally myself with this spiritual equation, good things happen. When I oppose the spiritual equation, bad things happen, and it's as simple as that. You know, just to wind up on the god of logistics.
yeah, I love that.
You know, when I did the first chemo, I was so sick, and you know, and so unhappy, and that you know, people would call up and I'd enumerate my woes, tell them all about how terrible it was, and of course that's just not fair because there's nothing that they can do about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of caught myself doing it one night, and that night I went to sleep, and I had this dream that kept recurring, 3 or 4 times. This dream kept recurring. It wasn't even an event; it was just one name, and that name was Jaco Pastorius. Now I knew that he was a bass player, a fretless bass player, but actually I had the wrong guy, Lily White. I was late talking with him. He said, "No, that wasn't Jaco Pastorius." But I looked up when I woke up. It was so pronounced, and I Googled Jaco, and he was born on the exact same day that I was born. And about 30, 40 days after I got sober, he was beaten to death by a bouncer at a nightclub. All of a sudden, I had to say, wow, I got the best part of my life, you know, in those intervening 37 years. You know, and what a gift it was, you know, to have been sober and lived the life that I lived, which was quite magical.
And you're feeling this way while you're fighting cancer.
Yeah, and just this sense of again, that sense of being in the right place at the right time, with my God of statistical likelihood, again, showing me the way.
It sounds like he continues to show you the way, and I think that your willingness to sit down with me today and express your story in such a meaningful way, I think will be important for people to hear, especially those people who wonder whether or not they can stay sober and still stay vital if they get as sick as you have become with as good an attitude as you have. I mean, it's just the compatibility of those things is not very high most days for people. I know when I was diagnosed with cancer last year, there got to be a point at which I was just getting tired of telling people about it. And they would say, "We'll pray for you. We'll pray for you, Howard." And I remember that always used to bug me when people would say they'd pray for me along the way. And it really confused me. And one day I went to my sponsor and I said, "What is this? Are they, while they're on their knees, they're saying my name within their spiritual moments or whatever else?" And he said, "No." He said, "When people tell you they pray for you, that means they love you. And it's an easier way to tell people that they love you." And it just, that reframing of that one thing is something I recalled when I had to be doing all the explaining to people. And it was beautiful to see the people in the program come around, and I'm grateful. And I can see the gratitude in your eyes and your demeanor, David, and it means the world to me that you'd spend this time.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me, Howard. I don't know whether any of this helps anyone. It's a bit like my long and dubious career in H&I. I know that it's showing up for your sober life is the prerequisite to having to this world of magic.
I was never late to a drink or a joint, so you got to arrive early and stay late when it comes to the program, don't you? David, you've just been marvelous, and I want to thank you for doing this today, and you'll be in my prayers.
Well, thank you. And when you say that, I'm in your prayers, I believe you. But what I believe is that you're sending spiritual energy my way. It's all good.
Well, David, again, many thanks.
Hey, you're very, very welcome, and thanks again for having me.
Well, my friends, that's it for today's episode of AA Recovery Interviews. I want to thank my guest, David P., for sharing his story, and thank you for tuning in. If you've enjoyed AA Recovery Interviews, please share it with others. This show is another helping hand of AA we can extend to alcoholics everywhere. If you want to contact me directly with any comments, questions, or suggestions, simply email howard@aarecoveryinterviews.com. Please also take a minute to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And take note, AA Recovery Interviews can now be found on the YouTube Music app. By the way, this podcast strictly adheres to AA's 12 traditions and all General Service Office guidelines for safeguarding anonymity online. AA Recovery Interviews and my guests do not speak for or represent AA at large. This podcast is simply my way of giving back to AA that which has been so freely given to me. The next episode of AA Recovery Interviews is on the way, so keep coming back. It'll be here soon.